First up, the district attorney in Atlanta announced this afternoon that the officer who shot and killed Rayshard Brooks in a Wendy's parking lot will face 11 charges, including felony murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, criminal damage to property, and violation of oath. And I should note, the sentence for felony murder is life without parole or the death penalty. And as calls for police reform continue around the country, Senate Republicans unveiled their bill, which, like the president's executive order, would call for voluntary bans on chokeholds with exceptions, would also increase data collection surrounding officers' use of force, provide for more training on alternatives to use of force, and include language recognizing the history of lynching in the U.S. In addition, it would strengthen penalties for filing false police reports, create a commission to study issues that affect black men and boys, and require departments to send reports to the AG on so-called no-knock warrants. But it would not ban those warrants like the Democrats' version does. Nor does the Republican bill address the issue of qualified immunity, which largely insulates police officers from legal liability. And already, the two sides are at war.
And our Democratic friends, if they want to make a law and not just try to make a point, I hope they'll join us in getting on the bill and trying to move forward.
What's clear is that the Senate Republican proposal on policing does not rise to the moment.
Here in Massachusetts, members of the two parties have worked together on a bipartisan bill Governor Charlie Baker announced today, which would create a database of officers' records, allowing public access to some of it, to what exactly matters. It would incentivize training on de-escalation, would create a certification for police officers that would need to be renewed every 3 years, and a process for decertifying police who've acted improperly, like if they use a chokehold or don't intervene if another officer is using excessive force. Massachusetts is one of a handful of states that do not already have a certification system in place, but Governor Baker says this is not the end of legislative efforts.
The bill we're filing today is the first step in a process that we hope will create a package of reforms that accomplishes the goals that we all share. The murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis at the hands of police officers made clear that now is the time to get this done.
Of course, Boston's policing systems have been among those under a powerful microscope once again since Floyd's killing. And one person recently declared racism a public health crisis in the city, proposing to divert some money from the police into community programs. That man, Boston Mayor Marty Walsh, joins me now. Mr. Mayor, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
You got a lot of positive feedback when you made that public health crisis declaration. But practically, what does that mean? What power do you have? How do things change after that announcement?
Well, what we did was we had a conversation that morning before I made the declaration at the press conference and talked to the hospitals in Boston, explaining to them that we need to make sure that we get information from them on racial information, so that when we think about health disparities, what they are and how do we make improvements in health disparities, how do we create access to more health. When I think about George Floyd's murder, instantly everyone's talking about policing, and I'm not downplaying that by any stretch of the imagination. But the inequalities in our country and the racism in our country goes far beyond policing. It goes into health disparities, it goes into economic development disparities, it goes into educational. And the first step we took was health disparities, really wanting to dive into it. The city had a program in 2006 that they did try to do something similar. They didn't declare racism as a public health emergency, but they were collecting data. And this really is about what do we take the data, what do we do with the data, and make improvements in health.
Yeah, I want to stay on police for a second, then we'll move to some of those other areas. Almost simultaneously, you said you want to be a national leader in fighting racism, but just a day or two after you made that announcement, the data, 3 years in the waiting, comes out on these so-called street investigations, stop and frisk. You know better than I, and the numbers are pretty depressing, showing that black people are the subject of these things in numbers grossly disproportionate to their percentage of the population. Do you say to yourself, maybe we're not the right city to be leading the national debate? Maybe we have to look inward and deal with our own stuff?
No, not at all. We are the right city to lead the race conversation, and we need to do that. I wouldn't say there's 3 years in the waiting for this information. The information has been given out, but it goes back, I think it actually goes back 7 or 8 years, the information, the data that we have. And clearly we see some issues that we have to work on there when it comes to stopping people and looking at people and pulling people over and collecting that information. It's good that we have that data in the first place so we can actually see how much work we actually have to do. And I think the work is not just on the policing part. There's so much more of it that we have to do. So there's no reason why Boston can't be the leader in this. I mean, we have been labeled as...
What was your... Can we stay on those numbers for a second? What was your reaction when you first saw the numbers from 2019?
I mean, I was shocked, and then I haven't had a chance to dive into the numbers and talking to the police department about why those numbers are high, and there's some work we have to do there. There's no question about it. And it's undeniable that we have major work to do here.
Let's talk about some specifics. You announced the other day 20% of the overtime budget, $12 million reallocated from the police department to human services, youth programs, public health, etc. Is that the bottom line, or is that a starting point in your discussions with the city council?
Some of my friends in the council have said that, this isn't enough. And if anyone's looked at my budget from 2014 to today, we've made major investments in equity. And it's not the first time that I've spoke about racism either, or acted on racism. We created dialogues in the city of Boston. The Rockefeller Foundation gave us a 100 Resilient City grant to expand on our race dialogue conversation. Every major speech that I've given as a mayor, I've talked about racial equity. I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce about the Chamber of Commerce and the business community back in 2016 to do more about diversifying their boards and diversifying their workforces and giving people opportunities. So I'm certainly not new to this conversation, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart. What happened with George Floyd after George Floyd's murder, I should say, what happened was this became front and center to every city in America and quite honestly across the world. And we need to, it's incumbent upon me as mayor of Boston, I can't speak for everyone else, to make sure that this stays at the forefront of our equity work and our work here in the city of Boston.
But just to be clear, is it possible that more money could be reallocated out of the police budget in the coming year?
Not out of the police budget, but there's more money that's going to come out of the budget that we're doing in the city. We've increased our school department budget by $100 million over the next 3 years. That is going to new programming. So there's a lot of money there. I mean, it's not just about taking money from one part to another part. I mean, that's not the answer to it. What it is, it's making sure that as we think about policing, making sure that we're looking and building upon the reforms that we've already done here in the city of Boston. I mean, complaints against police officers since I've started as mayor are down 41%. Aggressive use of force against police officers are down 50% complaints from 2013 to 2019. Also, our crime is down 30%. Our arrests are down 33%. So you can't just throw that out. You have to look at that work and see the work that's been done. We've diversified the police department. This last class that we just put on, there was 108 officers in there. 22% were black, 17.4% were Latino, 7% Asian, and 30% women. So we just can't say that we're not doing what we need to do. We are doing what we need to do. We might have to amplify it even more, which we will. But I think that there has to be, at least I'm going to acknowledge the work that's been done today.
You're a former union guy, former state legislature. There's some talk about whether or not police unions should even be able to negotiate over issues of discipline and collective bargaining. Would you be open to a discussion with the legislature about taking that right away from the police union?
No, I'm going to leave that conversation to the legislature to decide, having conversations with us on what to do and how we move forward here. I think that becomes a slippery slope as far as taking people's rights away, as far as organizing. I do think, though, that we have to have more open dialogue with the police unions about how we advance our police department moving forward. As a former president of the union, I was there to advocate on behalf of the members of the union that I was president of. And when I ran the building trades, the same thing. But I also think that when there's opportunity for reform, you have to take it. And as the building trades head, we created a program called Building Pathways, which is a pre-apprentice program, which received hundreds of young people of color into the building trades. And you also have to look at not only represent your membership, but you're representing a movement. And the movement has to be a positive movement. At this point in time, people aren't viewing necessarily police unions across the country as positive movements, and they do good things.
You know, you've mentioned a couple of times here that the issue is not just about policing, that there are a lot of disparities that need addressing. You and I, we've talked about wealth and income disparities here. Last night I had two representatives from BECMA, and not so long ago there was a report that below 1% of the city contracts go to minority and women-owned firms. What are you doing about that, Mr. Mayor?
We had a meeting, ironically, today about it, talking about adding a lot more advocacy as far as procurement and how we're going to move forward. Certainly, in some cases, there's a capacity issue. We don't have contractors to be able to bid on some of this work, but that's work we have to work on fixing. And I think there's an opportunity here now. And I have worked with BECMA on a policy and moving forward. So, and again, this is a problem that goes back generations, probably from the beginning of the foundation of the city. And we have some real institutional structural changes that we have to make. And it's incumbent upon me to push those through.
Before we leave and move to another crisis, that of public health, one of the organizers of the Youth March from Nubian Square for the People the other day was with me the other night, Queen Cheyenne Wade. And the last question I asked her is, if the mayor is going to be with me in a day or two, what would you say to him? Here's what she said.
I would like to say that I hope that he works to truly put the people of Boston first and to work towards not only just dismantling racism in a bureaucratic sense, but also in a literal sense in our communities and in our everyday lives that we see. And I would very much urge him to listen to the people of Boston.
What do you say to Queen Cheyenne and her colleagues, Mr. Mayor?
She's absolutely right. I mean, I think that it's not just a government change. It's a community change. It goes far beyond a city or a state or a national government. It is out in the community. It's a systemic problem. And I think that it's important that we do listen to people. And that's what I said 3 weeks ago at a press conference. I stood up there and I said, it's time for me to listen. And some of my colleagues on the council criticized me for saying that statement. And I think it is important to understand and listen. And that's what we have to do. And it's also important to take action. And that action can't just be, it's not, and she was right, it's not just the government response. And I think it's important for all of us, not just elected officials, but the whole community as a whole, to listen to young people. Young people are frustrated. Young people, in some cases, won't admit it, but they're probably scared. And young people want change, and they don't want to live through a situation that the generations before them lived through, particularly young black kids. And that's something that we have to do.
So, Mr. Mayor, before you go, moving from public safety to public health, I'm sure you see the photos and videos of the Seaport, other parts of South Boston this weekend. One restaurateur called it like spring break. When I saw these images, you would think Donald Trump came to town with his staff, mask-free all over the city. What are you going to do about this? You have read the riot act to people almost every day in your press conferences. A lot of people still don't get it, and as the weather gets hotter, it's going to get worse.
Well, what I'm telling people right now is look at Florida, look at Texas, look at Arizona. Look at those places that close down for a short period of time and open quickly, and that people aren't social distancing and aren't wearing masks, and see what's happening there. Watch those numbers spike. And that's what I'm afraid is going to happen here in Massachusetts and in Boston, that we're going to see a spike in numbers. Even the protests that we've seen over the last 3 weeks, we gave out thousands of masks, the city of Boston, to the protesters. We created a place for people to get tested for coronavirus. Anyone who's gone to the protests, we've tested 1,200 people the other day. I have major concerns that we're going to have a second spike, and you know, we're going to continue to talk about it. I'm going to continue to educate people on it, and I don't know much more we can say. With 120,000 Americans have lost their life due to coronavirus. If that number isn't, and that number, and people say, well, it's not compared to the 60 million that happened during the Spanish flu. During the Spanish flu, we didn't have the technology and the availability of getting information out to people. If we didn't have that availability, that number would be a lot higher. And I'm hoping that number doesn't get higher, but if people don't take care of themselves, that number, unfortunately, is going to grow.
I hope people are listening. Mr. Mayor, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.